has been taken off of the CTV main website, but is still on the CTV Winnipeg site. So that's very interesting. This gentleman is a former health official for Winnipeg, I think. I believe that it's for Winnipeg, maybe for Manitoba, but I think it was for Winnipeg. And he's weighing in on the virus. And the setup to this is the interviewer is saying, big increase in cases. We want to flatten the curve. They're coming back with this flatten the curve language, which was very popular at the beginning of the pandemic, but is no longer popular because people are sick and tired of it. And I'll show you why. And the data does not support the rhetoric being used by leadership across the board. So this doctor, this guy who was formerly in charge of dealing with stuff like this, has a very interesting perspective on it. I encourage you to go watch the whole thing, but here's a little choice bit. Here we go.
I mean, sometimes we talk about the virus causing all of these problems, but we have to also think of the response to the virus, which is causing quite a bit of issues too. So I just want to put in a couple of quick caveats. I'm not criticizing government decisions or our public health leaders. They have a lot more information about what's going on than I do, so I have to be respectful and humble about that. And I'm also not recommending that people should reject or not follow the directives or advice. But I do have questions about the policies and the attempts that are being used, not just in Manitoba but elsewhere, to try to interrupt the spread of this virus or control its impacts.
So what are some of your questions and concerns, Dr. Kettner? Obviously, we've had restrictions, we've had lockdowns in the past, and we could be facing more restrictions going forward. So what are kind of your main concerns?
Well, in public health, we have to look at the big picture, and we have to think about not just one disease, but all diseases and injuries and causes of morbidity and mortality. And we have to also think about the impacts of our interventions, the side effects, we call them in medicine, but the harms of interventions. And I think we're learning more about what those harms are and how they're maybe unfairly distributed and affecting people differently based on, single parents, people working for hourly wages, small enterprises which are closing, big effect on the economy and our deficit of government, impacts on education. I mean, we're learning more and more about what those harmful impacts are. So what's the benefit? Well, the benefit.
And so, I mean, this is an interesting interview, right? I'm interested, but he talks about the benefit, and is the benefit outweighing those harms? No, I don't think it is. And the harms, the potential harms, I mean, a virus can't kill the restaurant industry, targeted It can't kill bars and nightclubs and gyms, right? Targeted. But the government can and is. Brian Lilly says, just 3 outbreaks over a 12-week period. Would you shut down a whole industry based on that? From CTV Ottawa and CTV Christina, Ottawa restaurant bars account for 2% of outbreaks. I'll show you the graphs, but here's Brian Lilly again. He says, if Dr. Williams had walked into the office of Ford Nation, Doug Ford, and told him there were 27 outbreaks over 12 weeks in Toronto, more than 7,500 restaurants and bars, do you think Ford would have agreed to close them all? Williams didn't tell him. Read and retweet. It says, Brian Lilly, data doesn't support Dr. Williams' call to close for restaurants and gyms. And I've got a visual graph to show you as well. This was tweeted out yesterday, but then deleted. But this is the updated modeling that was released on the 29th by Dr. Williams' office, and it's got Ottawa and Toronto, Peel, York. You can see gyms in York accounted for 3 and 2%. Gyms and sports in York, 3 and 2%. Gyms and sports in Peel, 3 and 4%. Gyms and sports in Toronto, 6 and 3%. And hold on, where are the restaurants? Restaurant, bars, and nightclubs in Toronto, 27%. In Peel, 3.3 and 3%. That's restaurant, bars, and clubs. 10 and 8% in York. And where's the restaurants here? 3 and 2% in Ottawa. Are these numbers really numbers that justify the full closure of entire industries across a city, across 43% of our population? I just don't think so. So here's Brian Lilly. He said, so here's the big question after looking at the new models and data released by the province on Thursday. One thing I also want to point out, we have months of data. Here's Florida. They opened up in September 25th, clearing restaurants and bars to be fully open. We've got a month of that data, at least, right? 30th. We've got a month and a bit of data for that. What happened? Is Florida overwhelmed? Are their hospitals overwhelmed? I don't know why we're still relying on the modeling. It's really frustrating because we don't have to rely on the modeling. And this continued draconian lockdown, like, oh yeah, we're going to solve this problem by locking down, 27% and 10% and 3% and 3%. Little bits. But we're going to keep schools and daycares and long-term care facilities, and, we're going to just pour money into it. We're just going to pour money into it. But you restaurants, bars, and nightclubs, you're done. You have to close. Does this make any kind of sense? It's insane. It's insane. It is like having somebody who you don't trust run a franchise restaurant that you own, and every time you walk in, something's like going completely bonkers, and everybody just carries on and goes like, oh, okay, yeah, that's fine. That's fine. You don't want a racist running it, right? You don't want a nationalist running it, right? Morons. It's so crazy. It's so crazy. Anyway, back to this. Did the doctors advising Premier Doug Ford lie to him, or at least hide data from him when they advised him to put large parts of the province into a modified stage 2 of the lockdown? Dr. David Williams, the province's chief medical officer of health, released new data and modeling on Thursday that showed Ontario is not following the worst case scenario they had released on September 30th, and instead is trending lower in terms of case counts and hospitalizations. That's the good news. Yeah, I've got some things to show you there. This is just the same one the other day, but this is not justifiable in the data. Anyway, back to this. The bad news is that the province's top doctors released data that no sane politician would use to close whole sections of the economy. Just 2% of outbreaks in Ottawa between August 1st and October 24th were connected with restaurants and bars and nightclubs. The figure for Peel region was 3%, York region 8%. To put that in perspective, that amounts to 3 outbreaks in Ottawa, 3 in Peel, and 10 in York. Putting these numbers into perspective takes the teeth right out of it. Right? And showing these charts only gives you the percentages of the whole number. What about the percentage of this total of the population? It's a very small percentage of the population. It's incredible. It's incredible that we are destroying our economy for this. And enthusiastically, I'll show you how enthusiastically. Both the Prime Minister, the Deputy Prime Minister, right? She had her spending speech yesterday. We'll look at that. But here's the CTV News. New modeling shows where most COVID-19 outbreaks are happening in Ontario's hotspots. I'm just going to scroll down here. According to the data presented on Thursday, the province is not expected to exceed the 150 bed threshold for COVID-19 occupancy in intensive care units in the next month unless the situation gets rapidly worse. The provincial government has previously said that when there are less than 150 COVID-19 patients being treated in intensive care in Ontario hospitals, the province can maintain non-COVID-19 capacity in all scheduled surgeries. Once the number rises above 150, it becomes harder to support non-COVID-19 needs, the government said. Once it exceeds 350 people, it becomes impossible to handle. So we have an effective cap of 350 people in the ICU. And right now, that's good news because there's only 52 people in the ICU. But to shut down the healthcare system, it only takes 350 people in ICU. And we're in month 8 of this pandemic. Do you think that would be an important number to increase if you were expecting an increase of a second wave? Do you think that would maybe be necessary to work through in order to minimize the collateral damage? Don't you think? Why in the world is this a bottleneck? It is I know I say unbelievable way too much. It's like weird in the old days. But just it defies reason that a province as rich as Ontario, and we are rich in resources and people to extract those resources. We could right the ship. We really could if we started working. But it is incredible that we are so poorly managed that they're talking about increasing. They're funneling money into increasing the wait time approval ratings, right? The wait time approval ratings. If we've either got a crisis or we don't, right? And if we've got a crisis, then you solve the crisis. You don't go, oh, well, we hope we don't get over 350 because then it'll be locked down for you people, right? Not the government workers. Everybody gets a salary still, and not the teachers, et cetera. Just the private sector are forced to shut their businesses, and the hourly workers that are supported by them. But don't worry, we'll just keep printing money and giving it to you for free. Or, you'll pay it back eventually, or your children will. Right? Like this is not a plan. This is not a plan. This is bankrupting us, and it doesn't really help. It just kicks the can down the road, right? Like we need to actually open the economy, and if this isn't going away, we need to have a bigger capacity than 350 people province-wide to have in the ICU. Or you need to admit that the cases haven't been at near those numbers since We had 195 in the ICU on April 30th. We crossed the 150 threshold on the 27th of May. And we haven't seen those numbers, even close to those numbers since. In fact, it's been people in ICU on September 25th were 13. People in the ICU on October 28th, 51. So, sure, there's an increase there, but are we sure that that's all COVID? Do we know that? How do we know that? How? Please tell me. Okay, back to this. Furthermore, according to the data, there's been a 56% increase in confirmed COVID-19 bed occupancy in the province over the last 3 weeks. The majority has not required treatment in intensive care. So 56% increase. That's what this looks like on a graph. Okay, so previous, 3 weeks ago, that's roughly September 20th. Now that's like a month. 3 weeks ago, there hasn't been a 56% increase since the 10th of October? Is that a 56% increase? Anyway, it doesn't matter. But 43 people in hospital and now 75, 71 on the 28th. And today's the 30th. I'm finding it hard to believe, right? Why not use the numbers if 56% sounds a lot worse than, 25 more people, right? I don't know. Back to the sharper increase in cases, deaths in long-term care. Brown went on to state that despite avoiding the worst case scenario as outlined in previous projections, the spread of COVID-19 can dramatically turn, leading to rapid growth quite quickly. We're not seeing that, right? I haven't seen mass death out of Florida overwhelmed by pandemic. There's other states that have opened up as well. Georgia didn't lose their minds and shut down. I think it's well past time we stop just taking their word for it, because they're not telling us the truth. They're just not. They're just not. Here's Lucas Meyer. Premier Doug Ford can't say 100% that a modified stage 2 regions will move back into stage 3 at the end of the upcoming 28-day period. Says looking at surgical approach to each region. Says modeling numbers coming today will have a bit of good news. I asked about how the province plans to inform the public of when that decision will be made, a day before, 2 or 3, but Ford didn't say. So again, this data has led to, we're not sure if we're going to be able to open up again. Does this data look like we're being overwhelmed, right? Does this data look like the restaurants and clubs and bars and health clubs, etc., need to be closed down? I don't see it. I don't see it. Is it just me that's missing this? Is it just me that thinks it's mismanagement that's making the long-term care homes continue to be hotspots? Why are health regions, health officials telling the health agencies to get red zones, hotspots set up in Quebec in long-term care agencies or long-term care homes? Why is that? That seems like counterproductive to me, right? It seems like that shouldn't be happening to me. It seems like the B team's on the field and you really want the A team for this one, right? It seems like not the B team. It seems like the other team's B team is on the field because they're not playing for us, right? They're like fumbling the ball and it's like, oh, he's pitching. No, he's not. Why do I keep using baseball reference? I don't even watch baseball. Okay, moving on. Here's Pierre Poilievre, and I haven't queued up the exact part of this speech that I want him to talk about. I'll just start it and stop it when it feels natural. The whole speech, it's like 4 minutes. It's worth a watch. The frustrating part here is there's nothing they can do. They have to convince the NDP and the Bloc at the same time to bring down this government. And the Liberals are stonewalling the Conservatives. And every time the Conservatives get close to opening up the WE documents, the Liberals are just going to shut it down. They are playing absolute savage power games. They don't want to entertain this. They are not going to entertain this. And if looks like they might get close, they make it into a confidence vote and force the NDP to vote against those pesky Conservatives, right? Those evil Conservatives. So this is great grandstanding, but it's nothing more than grandstanding unless there is also back channel conversations for how to bring down this government because they're obviously corrupt and they will not answer questions. That is enough to bring down this government. Trudeau could trigger an election if he wanted an election. And it seems like he wants an election. And it seems like these guys don't want to give him an election, but they want to hammer him on these things that aren't going to change. Because fundamentally, if it looked like it would get close to that, Trudeau will just trigger an election and stop the whole thing. And it looks like that would be good for Trudeau. It looks like he would gain seats. Okay, I'm going to play this. I agree with this. I just think it's grandstanding. And I think that in order to get together what needs to happen. It needs to be done with back channels, and it needs to just appear. The Trudeau Liberals need to be blindsided by whatever action is taken. They can't know about it because they'll filibuster, and then flip it around on you so that you look like the person who instituted or started whatever nonsense that they actually are responsible for. Here's Mr. Poilievre.
We're in the middle of the biggest economic crisis since the Great Depression. 1.8 million Canadians are without a job. Small businesses have out. Their local enterprises lacerated by shutdown rules and overeager bureaucrats seeking to hand out fines. People's lives have been turned upside down, and folks with vulnerabilities have become sick with this new virus. Others are suffering because of the secondary health effects of a lockdown. You would think that the parliamentary committee responsible for finance would be talking about this crisis, but we're not. Instead, Liberals have us talking about this. These are the covered up scandal documents. Documents that parliamentarians asked for on July the 7th. I put forward a motion to unseal all this black ink and reveal the information publicly. A motion that could have been passed in just a few minutes so Finance Committee could get back to its vital work of rescuing Canadians' lives and livelihoods during the pandemic. But instead of letting us vote on that motion and get back to work, Liberals on the committee have spent 25 hours over 4 weeks of debate, speaking 171,000 words into the record to run the clock. They've spoken about such...
Okay, and he lists all the things they speak about, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, it's good grandstanding. It makes sense. It's a punch. It's a jab. But it doesn't... You need to follow it up a little bit. There's a call to action. Share this video. Tell people about it. I wish the sound was a bit better, but, I'm a little bit... I'm the last person to talk about that, right? So sorry about that, everyone. But I think that this is the right direction to go in to fight this if you actually want to fight this, because the parliamentarians have tried the parliament route and it's not working. So you need to use the bully pulpit. You need to inform the public. And in order to inform the public, you also need a call to action. You need to tell them what we're going to do about it. What are we going to do about it? And do you notice how many politicians say, what we're going to do is sign this petition and we're going to tell them that we don't like it? No, that's not good enough. Signing the petition looks slimy. It's a way to collect my information. And I've never, ever seen a petition that's done one lick of good on the House of Commons floor. Not once. And, maybe it's a way to pantomime action, right? The real action is calling your MP, calling your MPP, having meetings with them, maybe create a get out the action campaign, get out the blah campaign, go and speak to people, tell people how upset you are about this. And maybe that will do something. I don't know. But there needs to be a follow-up. This is good. At the end, there's a call to action. He says, share this video. Great. I love that they're sharing the video, all of that stuff. This is how you get people to share things. Marketing 101, right? And politicians don't do marketing 101 usually. So that's the basics. Tell them to do something. But what's the overarching? It's like you're planning a television show season, right? And you want to have tentpole events, come to these events. And you want to have builder events. Builder events are like, come and watch this conversation, this talk, this thing. We're going to talk about the corruption in the government. We're going to talk about the bad spending. We're going to talk about how this could potentially go bad. We're going to talk about how we could fix this. And this isn't just for Poilievre. This is for everybody, right? This is for how you address something like this meaningfully. You get allies. You talk to military leaders. You talk to leaders in the community. You talk to other people who are of a like mind, and you say, what do you think? How would you solve this problem? Were it up to you to solve? Would you do what these people are doing? What possible explanation could there be for what these people are doing? Get more people on your side. Get press for it. And if the press don't give you press, make press for it. Just like this. I feel like all the advice is, they do some things that I talk about sometimes. And I'm sure that there are a lot of people who listen who are aides and whatever for these people. I'm sure of it, because I've seen exactly like the next day in the old Conservative Party anyway, under Scheer, the next day they would make changes like that. They weren't doing call to actions, and then they were. And that's good. I'm glad that people do this. But sometimes it feels like they take some of my advice and then they go, oh, but we don't understand the rest of it, so we're not going to do it. But it's important. That's the authentic thing. And here's the secret sauce. Be authentic. Be authentic. Really actually believe what you're saying. And answer the question like, hey, what about that Muslim Brotherhood thing? Right? Demonetize the video right there. Right, Mr. O'Toole? What about that Muslim Brotherhood thing? There's lots to ask. Be authentic, right? There's a way to actually speak to Canadians. People want to be spoken to, but not by shysters and not by liars. Right? And we've got a lot of shysters and a lot of liars. And I'm not calling Mr. Poilievre a shyster or a liar, but I'm saying that if you're going to do that strategy, if you're going to bring it to the people, it has to be genuine. Norman Spector says, the Liberals have not tabled a formal budget since March 2019, before they were re-elected with a minority government. The Finance Department has also stopped releasing bi-weekly updates on the cost of COVID-19 programs. Who cares? Yahtzee, it's just money, right? Here's the Toronto Sun. Freeland's Marie Antoinette moment. I've got that terribly wrong. I shouldn't have messed up that name, but whatever. Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland seems to think that we can only get the economy roaring again if we keep it on life support as long as possible. If you're scratching your head and rereading that sentence over twice, fear not. Those words don't make much sense to us either, and yet they're an accurate description of the fiscal policy unveiled by Freeland on Wednesday. While giving a virtual speech to the Toronto Global Forum, Freeland was unconcerned about massive amount of deficit spending the country is engaging in, and actually believes that keeping the taps on is the key to a stronger recovery. Our citizens and our companies are suffering through no fault of their own, Freeland said. For a government to abandon them at a time like this would be monstrous, and it wouldn't just be heartless, it would be an economic mistake. That's because our eventual recovery will be faster and more complete in direct proportion to how much we limit the economic scarring caused by the coronavirus recession. The government-imposed lockdown coronavirus recession. Because if people were able to assess their own risk, everything would be back to normal now. If there were no mask mandates and people could look outside and see that, people aren't hanging white blankets from their door with a sign that says, plague, stay away. Right? Like, this is not happening here. It's not happening here at all. Back to this. Nobody, though, is calling for the government to simply turn off the support programs while leaving businesses shut down. What more and more people are asking for is evidence about why certain sectors, such as restaurants and gyms, have been shut down. They want to get things moving again. People aren't asking to be placed on government assistance. They're asking to be able to live their lives. Yet Freeland doesn't seem troubled by pushing aside a large segment of society to the sidelines for this foreseeable future. When she was asked whether the country can afford the massive spending announcement the Liberals government has been making, she responded in French with, "La réponse est simple. Oui." The response is simple, she tells us. The answer is yes. This cavalier French phrase reminds us of Marie Antoinette's advice to starving peasants who were lacking bread to feed their families: let them eat cake. So very simple, just like Freeland's response. Shut down sectors, force people out of work, and onto government assistance. Keep the money flowing forever. We believe Canadians deserve a smarter and more robust game plan than this. Yes, absolutely. And not just us. Here's other people, the Twitter sphere, saying the Liberals are letting Canadians down. John Ivison says the same. The government has been silent on the world beyond the pandemic, apart from an over-reliance on low interest rates as justification to keep spending. It's a whole opinion piece talking about how inappropriate the spending is that we're engaging in. Senators are getting in on the request to freeze wages of all federal politicians as Canadians struggle financially during pandemic, Senator proposes. The motion would largely amount to a symbolic gesture, but an important one as private sector and low-income workers bear the brunt of COVID's economic fallout. How about just opening up, How about just allowing Toronto to have its bars and restaurants open and see how things go, and let's actually look at the deaths and hospitalizations. And if there's a problem, if our bottleneck is actually 350 people in the ICU, which seems, considering the cost of our healthcare system, I'd really love to drill down into that. I'd love to get an explanation as to why it's that. But anyways, here's why I say the B team for the other team is playing on our field as our players. Blanchet demands apology from Trudeau for War Measures Act invoked 50 years ago. I'm not going to get into this. It looks like a complete distraction, right? The NDP support it too. There's a whole video of Jagmeet and Evan talking about the War Measures Act. It seems like a distraction. What could they be possibly distracting from? I mean, COVID-19, great distraction, right? Why bring the War Measures Act into it? Oh, right. Federal government to announce new immigration targets today. No, stay locked in your houses, keep your restaurants closed, but we're gonna bring in a whole new immigration target. Right? Immigration Minister Marco Mendocino will unveil a 3-year immigration plan today that will set targets for bringing skilled workers, family members, and refugees into Canada in the midst of a global pandemic. Great! Sign me up, right? Laws against thieving by public servants was quietly repealed by Parliament through access to information. Shows it was used to file 47 charges from 2004 to 2014. Interesting thing to repeal, just notable little bit to finish us off. Here's a little personal one to finish us off today. I thought this was hilarious because of the hypocrisy, right? Like, these are the people who are in charge of education in Guelph and across the Upper Grand District School Board. They say this: last night, the Upper Grand District School Board trustees unanimously passed a motion expressing their support for all members of the board's diverse community and to remain committed to breaking the cycle of systemic racism. We will not tolerate any expression of hatred. And I say, Kalinda Klein stated any system built by white people is inherently racist because it was built by white people. She's still on the Equity Steering Committee. You're using critical race theory for your policy development. You are propagating racism. Here's their statement, and then I'll show you what they say. The Board of Trustees passed a motion that the Upper Grand District School Board is committed to an inclusive culture of collaboration and respect for all members of our community. We will not tolerate expression of hatred. We stand up for and support all members of our diverse community. As a public sector organization and employer, we are committed to breaking the cycle of systemic racism in our own operations and the broader community. The motion was put forward by trustee Jolie Betty, who expressed that she was stunned to hear about the hatred and assaults targeting Muslim individuals in Guelph at the end of September. It's interesting because I sent emails regarding this incident this was during the June 16th board meeting presentation to the trustees about the equity plan that had changed. Here it is.
Because the systems were all developed by folks who were white, that they are inherently a racist in that. And so where I think people get really confused when we...
So it's very interesting that that person is still writing the equity policy for the Upper Grand District School Board. They're teaching critical race theory in classrooms as if it's fact. These people are racist, and they're using cover of critical race theory to further their racist agenda. And while being racist openly, they say, oh yes, we don't tolerate any racism. Hypocrites to the highest order, hypocrites, all of you. From Martha Rogers to Robin Ross to Kalinda Klein and all of them, racist. Somebody should stand up and talk about how racist they actually are instead of patting themselves on the back for their empty words from racists. That'll be the end of my show today. Thanks for watching, everybody. Check out CanadaPoly.com. Check out CanadaReport.co. Check out check out SpeakingMoistly.co, and have a wonderful, wonderful